those of you playing at home, every time Ian says joy, take a drink.
I have listened back, and I said it in the first and second episode. Haven't said it since, but you tell me every episode I say it.
And warm blanket.
Yeah, warm blanket.
Ian spends his nights curled up in bed listening to himself.
That's genuinely true. It puts me to sleep.
We should use that as the opening. That's great. Hello and welcome to The Last Picture House, the podcast where we discuss classic films. I'm your host, Marcus Lovett, and joining me to reflect on the vicissitudes of time are regular panelists Ian, an old man full of regret Norton, Die, Let Go of the Past, Kill It If You Have to, Lynch, and Maria, History is Going to Change, Suzuki. This episode, The Decade in Film, we'll recount our favorite cinema of the 2010s. What movies linger on the mind like the memory of the Obama administration? What films will some future Tarantino appropriate in a breathless, absurdly violent homage to the era? With a mix of erudition and imponderabilia, our panel will examine what made the 2010s a decade to remember. And if you enjoy the show, please remember to subscribe on iTunes, podcast player, or your preferred podcasting app. I trust you had a pleasant New Year's holiday. I took the opportunity to catch up on all the Netflix shows that I missed at the end of last year. How about you guys? Ian?
So we decided to take Koto, my daughter, off to the mountains for our first snow, and it was all going very well, apart from we didn't realize there wasn't going to be any snow. So we got to the mountains, and there was no snow.
Minor technical
issue. There was no snow. So then on the second day, it decided to snow, and there was too much snow, so we couldn't go outside.
It was like a blizzard.
Yeah. So Koto decided, much as she does love Frozen, the cold does bother her after all.
I dedicated my time in the things that I love most, going to the cinema. And in Shibuya, there's a cinema called Cinema Vera that does films from the 30s, 40s, 50s. And there was a retrospective about noir. So I explored some hidden gems like Narrow Margin, which was Train, Ride, and Save the Witness film.
Basically, the plot is the mob is after this woman who's going to testify.
Yeah.
And it's all set on a train. So it's a real sort of Hitchcock film.
So I enjoyed it very much.
Great. How about you, Di?
Well, I went back to the green grass of home in Wales, and because flights are very, very expensive, I obviously took one flight to Hong Kong for 5 hours, and then Hong Kong to London, and that was 13 hours. So I had lots of time to watch films on the plane, and this will sum up the experience for you. I watched Hobbs and Shaw on the plane, and that is the best plane film that you will ever see. It's funny, there's action, you can look away for like an hour and come back, and it's fine, don't worry about it, it'll catch you right back up.
Well, before we get into our picks for the best of the decade, a quick word on our selection. So with so many films to choose from and a finite amount of time in which to discuss them, we've opted to focus on the movies that stuck with us. These are the films that we know we'll be going back to years from now. Di, your starter for 10, is there one film that defined the decade?
When I was reeling off my list of people who were asking, what's the next podcast about? I said, we're going to talk about the films of the decade. And I reel off some of the films that are personal to me. Everyone kind of goes, no, that's not for me. And so I started thinking about what really defines the decade for me. And it can't just be about movies. It has to be about politics. It has to be about life. It has to be about what the world is right now. And maybe that will change in retrospect going forward. Who knows? But for me right now, it has to be something like The Social Network. And this is a film which came out relatively early into the decade, but was so prescient, was so on the nose of so many elements of culture, of society, of the way we interact, the way we talk to each other online, the way our online lives are going to eventually go on to impact politics, referendums, elections. All of these different things come together, and David Fincher already has an incredible filmic scape in this film. One of the sequences that stands out for me is the boat race with the tilt-shift camera moves.
And the soundtrack where they...
The soundtrack, of course.
They use Hall of the Mountain King. It's Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, right? They redid it in this kind of like electronic way. That was brilliant.
Yeah, it all comes together in an incredibly watchable package. And even like when you look at the way the narrative flows, so I jumping back and forth between different cases, different dates, different stories. It's all subjective, that film as well. It's all secondhand. because they're all telling a different story. And you think about the way we live our lives now via Facebook, everything's secondhand, everything's been tarted up to make it look amazing. It's a really clever film, and for me, I know I'm going to look back and think, yeah, Social Network, the 2010s.
And it also has that great script from Aaron Sorkin. We know that people don't talk like that, but it's the theatricality that I think makes that.
People on Facebook will write like that because it's a film about the way you want to be viewed, and it's the way we manipulate our image online.
And yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Di just said about Social Network. We talked about this off air. When we're talking a zeitgeist film, it doesn't necessarily have to be a film we like, because I don't particularly like Social Network. But I think if we're talking about the decade, the previous decade was defined by like the cell phone. This decade was defined by social media. So I do think Social Network is a zeitgeist film, with the only caveat I'd add that came at the start of the decade, and it shows some of the perhaps naivety and even some hope to what a social network could be. To bookend that, you've got the end of the decade with something like Joker, which shows the other side of the nasty side, the dirty side of the decade, where you've got the rise of the right, and you've got how things have gone viral and how badly wrong the 15 minutes of fame can go. Joker's, it's a nasty film, it's dirty, like behind the back of the cooker, and it shows these kind of paper-thin ideologies that then can try and lead into these kind of rioting and influence.
I remember when the film came out, and I thought it was kind of pretentious to be doing a film about the social network. At the time, it seemed kind of too much, but looking back, it was exactly the right film at the right time. Maria, do you have a movie that captured the decade's zeitgeist?
It's not a particular film. It's more of a trend of the last couple of years with Asian cinemas. I think that this cinema is not just a cinema of the elite, but it's really participating to everyday conversation, particularly thinking of Parasite and the influence that is given to cinema viewers. I think that the thing that we can take away is non-Hollywood culture participating in the discourse.
So let's begin with a hugely successful Hollywood film from early in the decade, Inception. Christopher Nolan's follow-up to his Batman sequel, The Dark Knight. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio and a murderer's row of up-and-coming performers, Inception cemented Nolan as this big-budget, high-concept director. A gang of mind thieves must implant an idea into a man's dreams. What follows is pure spectacle. I loved this film, and I love the way that Nolan does this whole Bond meets art movie. In particular, I really like the ambition of the film. Di, what did you take away from Inception?
I mean, there are some stunning visual sequences. I'll never forget watching the fight scene in the twisting corridor, which is all done practically. He's proven time and again that that's generally what he wants to do anyway.
Yeah,
and he'll go practical over digital any day of the week. Even so much as in Dunkirk, when he had the planes flying over modern-day Dunkirk, and you could totally see it's modern-day Dunkirk down there with modern buildings, but like it doesn't matter. And then the film is like you don't really mind. He's right. It doesn't matter. But there's this reliance on practical effects and high-definition slow motion and the wonderful soundtrack that's sort of like ramming home, and the sort of slowing down of traditional musical scores and all this sort of subliminal layering that's going on in the film.
Just on the high-speed photography, so one of the stories I heard is that when they were shooting the bathtub scene, so remember that scene where Cobb falls backwards, the kick, and he falls backwards into the bathtub. When you shoot at that speed, you need a lot of light, and they had so much light that the bath was actually steaming, so they then had to kind of like get rid of the steam in order to shoot the scene. Ian, Inception?
So I was really excited at first to see Inception. I love the Dark Knight trilogy. We'd already seen in something like The Prestige that he could do these quite complex, sort of layered plots. And I remember I went to see it the day it opened. I saw it again about 2 days later. And then, for some reason, I just never went back to it. And when we started doing up our list of films for this year, I was a bit skeptical. I was like, really, Inception? So I rewatched it again today. I finished it like stepping off the train to come to the studio. And I'd forgotten the scale of it. I'd forgotten how ambitious and just the scale of the set pieces. Every one of those set pieces in any action film would be spectacular. But to layer them on top of each other and to leave it with so many questions as well. On the rewatch today, I spotted things I maybe didn't pick up on the first time round.
There's also those genre conventions that he uses. So while it seems to be a wholly original film, it still uses these tropes from heist movies in particular to tell the story, to set up the rules of the world, and then, of course, break the rules.
And of course, it goes fully Bond by the end as well in the snow. And to have the audacity to take on the Bond genre and mix it with everything else, I thought was spectacular. On what you said about the layers, in the Japanese release, they had a little note up in the corner to tell you which layer of dream you were in the whole time.
I remember that, yeah.
So I'd never seen that. I think that on the first take, that might have been quite useful because there were points where I'm like, exactly whose dream are we in again?
And I'm pretty sure they did something similar in Dunkirk for the Japanese release.
Yes, they did. They told what timeline the audience was in the actual moment.
I also liked it for the performances as well. This was the start of DiCaprio's kind of renaissance for me because, as I've said before on here, I wasn't the hugest fan. And he's very good in this, and it was the start of seeing people like Tom Hardy and things, and to see Cillian Murphy being reused. And again, as I talked about earlier, this resurgence, to see Michael Caine in this go into the Nolan
Well, he was
world.
setting up his ensemble.
Yes.
Right? And
yeah.
he's still working with Michael Caine, his good luck charm, right? So, yeah, it's almost like going and seeing a rep company, like a theatre company, and the same players playing different characters, and knowing those actors and seeing that they're capable of other things. So there's another kind of layer there as well.
And it's also that Nolan didn't have to do this. He was already very successful. He could have done anything he wanted, but this is what he wanted to do. And the studios would have let him do anything at that point, and he did, and it worked.
Maria?
I joined the conversation a little bit late because my DiCaprio Renaissance film was Django, which I think is a couple of years later. Unfortunately, I didn't watch it at the cinema, and I regret that. I was really struck by the inventiveness, the concept of time, not exactly clear all the time. The story is disputable, but I like how cool it is, the sleek look of it. Nolan is not exactly famous for his female characters, but Marion Cotillard in this not clear story, but it still makes sense.
How often does a film try to use that femme fatale character, like in the last 10, 20 years even, where you bring in a femme fatale and obviously they're playing with the noir trope, and for that person to really work, for that character to really click, and I think that she gets it. She really nails that character.
Yeah.
I love the dialogue as well when Joseph Gordon-Levitt's shooting at some of the terrorist mind people, whatever they are.
The security force.
The projection security force. And when he's shooting at them, and then Hardy just walks past and says, "You need to dream a little bigger, darling." It's lovely.
And Hardy's character for the rest of the decade was set in that moment, I think.
Well, that was my first falling in
Certainly
love.
the time when I noticed him, yeah.
That was me falling in love with Tom Hardy.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity to move to another huge action spectacle, possibly the action film on the list, and that is, of course, Fury Road. George Miller's 2015 return to the Mad Max story. Di, I know you're a big fan. What makes this film the action film of the decade?
On the surface, it does what a lot of action films do. You know, you have your set pieces. There are moments in the film where the tension is heightened and things happen, like what in all films do. But there is something that happens with George Miller's direction, and it's encompassed in a simple visual trick that he's using, and it's this idea of whatever is happening on the peripheral of the screen. If you're keeping your central character in the center of the screen, you can basically do whatever you want with the camera. And there are moments in these hour-long set pieces. This is the thing. The entire film, the main set piece is the film. And you have these layering of events, of beats, of and this is musical as well because it's happening on the audio spectrum as well. And all of these things are building to this ultimate and wonderful crescendo. This is one of the rare films where you can actually say it is an experience. It's a ride.
And to a large extent, it's also like a silent film because you could watch that. It's musical in its editing. Yeah. And I think I know what you mean. You can turn the sound down and you can follow the entire story without any problems whatsoever. It's like a Buster Keaton film or a Charlie Chaplin film. It's fall down, get up, what happens. You're always guided by George Miller's direction and the brilliant editing to kind of know where the character is going, what their intention is, what they're looking at is going to be important. Something that's brought into the foreground we know is going to be important later on. It might be a dropped weapon or something like that.
Yeah, and it's not just about understanding what's happening in the film in those moments. It's about understanding the actual character development. I mean, the entire spectrum of that film can be understood visually.
I clearly remember watching it in the cinema, and it was like being inside a video game. I never had that. I was a little bit hangover, and it didn't help, but it certainly was an experience.
Did you watch it in 3D?
I don't remember. It felt like it was 3D.
I think that would hurt.
With a hangover? You're like going and seeing Cats with...
Don't give me ideas. Don't give me ideas.
Cats and cannabis.
I remember the incredible creativeness and something like an independent fantasy, not like the Marvel theology and I remember the scene with the court musician traveling with the stage. The movie is full of these like ideas that are grand. It's not my favorite genre, but this film really blew my mind.
My take is nowhere near as intellectual as everybody else on this. It's big and it's mental, and it starts at 100 miles an hour and it never stops. They go screaming across the desert. Everything's on fire. There's guitars with fire coming out of them and more fire and explosions. They get across the desert and they turn around and they come all the way back. It's brilliant. It's breathless. It's exhausting to watch. In every good way possible. And just one other note, like I know Tom Hardy is how we got into this, but it's Charlize Theron's movie. She is
Imperator
spectacular.
Furiosa. Yeah, the name. Like
It's better than Italian accent, for sure.
It really is. But also, I think what adds...
It's a credible character.
She's amazing.
She's a wholly credible character.
Yeah.
It's her film. But I think what also adds to this as well, it's the lack of CGI. Most of these were physical stunts. The most CGI in the film was used on her arm. They did all of this.
There was that they enhanced some of the explosions, of course.
Yeah. But they did string a guy up, make fire come out of his guitar, and drive him across the desert. What's not to love?
As an Australian, there's something almost nostalgic watching that kind of movie for me. It's because it reminds me of going and seeing Circus Oz. The names of the characters are just making fun of them. For example, you've got Nux, you've got Slit, you've got Rictus Erectus, Toast the Knowing, the Splendid Araghad, I don't even know what that is, Capable, the Dag, Cheeto the Fragile. I mean, just the names are incredible. But there's a real Australian sense of humour, I think, that runs through this film.
It's complete unapologetic action, but there's a weight to it as well that makes it just superb.
Originally, they're going to film it in Australia, and of course, Australia, most of the year, it is very, very hot, very dry, as we know. They were going to go out to the desert, and at that particular time, it rained, and it rained a lot. So the grass was growing in the desert. So they had to relocate, and I think they shot in Namibia. Our next entry ably demonstrated that faint glimmers of civilization are left in this barbaric slaughterhouse. Grand Budapest Hotel from 2014, the Wes Anderson film. Gustav H., a concierge, is wrongly framed for murder at the Grand Budapest Hotel. In the process of proving his innocence, he befriends a lobby boy.
Get your hands on my lobby boy.
Wes Anderson has built a career out of creating absurd comic ensemble films that mine nostalgia. There's the Royal Tenenbaums, Moonlight Kingdom, and my personal favourite, Life Aquatic. So here the cast includes Tilda Swinton, F. Murray Abraham, Ralph Fiennes, Jude Law, Saoirse Ronan, and Jeff Goldblum. Oh, and of course, Bill Murray. Grand Budapest Hotel, though, while it's very funny, it's very, very funny at times, for my money, it's a more mature film. And the reason is there's this wistfulness that kind of creeps into the film, particularly when you see it a second time and you understand the entire kind of story. There is something that it just seems a little bit more adult and a little bit more mature. What did you think, Ian?
I mean, I completely agree. I kind of thought I was a bit done with Wes Anderson. I thought I was Wes Andersoned out because often I find some of the films a little bit self-indulgent, but this one seemed to have a much more at its core. It did, like you said, it felt maturer. It was maybe him...
Maturer.
Maturer. Can you say that? Is that a word?
No.
I'm teaching adjectives at the moment. This one felt more mature, where often it can go into just bouts of whimsy and sort of off in odd directions. It doesn't always drag me along with it. Sometimes the actors, especially in what's the train one? Darjeeling
Limited.
Yeah, where it looks like the actors are having more fun than we are watching them. In this, it did seem a bit more trimmed down. It seemed there was more to it. There was perhaps a weight there or something, while still being incredibly
Well, it could be
fun.
the source material, I'm not sure. Stefan Zweig, the writer, I know that the plot was based, or at least the mood perhaps was based on his writings. I'm not sure the exact relationship with Stefan Zweig.
Would you say this is the best of Anderson?
Yeah, this is definitely his best film from my point of view. And throughout the entire decade, I felt that this is one of the best comedies. Now, toward the end of the decade, there were other films that came along, but, up until 2017, 2018, I was like, oh, he's in my top 3.
And I think it's also, he's so good at getting these comic performances out of actors as well. Ralph Fiennes is not someone I kind of straight away think of when I think of a great comic
although
actor.
that is changing, I agree, but that has changed with this and then with Hail Caesar in particular, where he plays this director, just totally hamming it up. Ralph Fiennes has demonstrated that he has the comic timing, but I think we associate him more with maybe those of us who've grown up with him, we associate him with the leading man roles and perhaps something like Robert Redford's Quiz Show or something.
Also, like his Shakespeare adaptation.
Yeah, and Coriolanus, yeah.
Yeah, and he's more recently the Russian White Swan, the Russian film he did, where he learnt Russian for the role. But I also think that's Wes Anderson's one of his great talents. It's up there with Death of Stalin for getting these actors normally known for their gravitas and bringing these comic performances out of them, because it's so big and so larger than life. But yet it still works. He's not chewing the scenery. Well, he is chewing the scenery.
He's chewing the scenery.
But it's fun.
But it's part of an ensemble, and everyone's playing the same game. They're all part of the same machine. And I think that's what links this to the Death of Stalin, that everybody's inhabiting the same world, often with their own original accents. It works very, very successfully here.
And I think it pulls off that trick that's hard to do of you're watching on screen actors having a wonderful time being in the film, but instead of alienating the audience, they're dragging you along with them. So you're having as much fun as they are on screen.
The film was shot in Germany in a place called Görlitz, and I think they took an old department store and used that for the hotel. I think the department store may have been being demolished or in the process of being demolished, something like that. So the production moved in there, and I believe that the actors also inhabited that space, stayed in those rooms while making the movie. And so, yeah, one thing that he does brilliantly is create these comic ensembles, and you get the sense that the actors are all having a ball, because I think the production, they are doing that, whether it's William Dafoe, a name I didn't mention, Jeff Goldblum playing the piano to the rest of the actors. I think that there is this kind of ensemble thing that gets built up with the Wes Anderson project. And the script, Maria, I mean, there are some great lines in this film.
Yeah, especially Ray Fiennes' character. A lot of the lines are quotable. What I remember is when he looks at the corpse of Madame Celine. And you're looking so well, darling. You really are. They've done a marvelous job. I don't know what sort of cream they put on you down at the morgue, but I want some. I love this kind of like metrosexual character of Gustav.
Jeff Goldblum. Did he just throw my cat out the window?
I think that the actors really allow themselves to open up, to go places with him. There's a lot of trust for this director.
Well, they open up because I think they see the bigger picture, that this is a kind of a play. And Wes Anderson's talked about, they're very much up front in Rushmore, where there's this young man putting on plays and reenacting the Apocalypse Now with the Vietnam War on stage at his high school. Wes Anderson's films all seem to be about that. They seem to be about play to some degree. Now, they're not always as successful as Grand Budapest Hotel, I think, because they're about play, but maybe they're a little bit hollow in terms of the relationships or where the characters develop. However, here, really, the characters do develop. There is an arc, and I think that's what makes this film so successful. The past decade spawned endless reboots, remakes, sequels, Ghostbusters, A Star is Born, a revived Alien franchise. Then, of course, there were the Marvel and DC films. Key to the success of Marvel in particular was the idea that characters from different comic books inhabit the same extended universe. Go back 10 years and there was, 1, 2 Iron Man films?
Yeah, when you go back to the start of the MCU, it's a really fascinating story, because you start looking at the shaky sort of ground that they actually began on. The Incredible Hulk with Ed Norton was released basically kind of alongside Iron Man, and you see these little sort of sprinklings of the idea that these films are connected, and it really was nothing more than a passing mention here or there, usually in the end credits, which is why the end credit thing has become such a big thing for Marvel movie fans. But if you look at the sort of the filmscape, and there's certainly the superhero filmscape back then, there was no reason to believe that audiences had any interest in seeing films that were connected in such an integral way. Certainly not the way they became like that, because if you go back, we've got the Batman, there's the Spider-Mans. I mean,
there were separate ideas, like separate films.
Yeah. I mean, you have returning characters in Spider-Man, like Sandman and Spider-Man 3, the Raimi movies, and it's their own things, and they're drawing on the well of the comic book movies, but this idea that they could have nothing more than a cameo. The cinematic universe itself isn't a new thing. We've had, Godzilla. If you want to go for like a classic franchise,
Hammer,
the Hammer horror films. My goodness, yes, yeah. So we're on slightly shakier ground with Iron Man 2, and you can see where they're pushing the formula and they're molding it. And it's these early MCU films where you can see they're really nailing down what it is. And I think that's important because they're also, obviously behind the scenes, they're going to be thinking about, well, how are we going to have other films? They can't all be just like this. Each film is going to have its own tone, its own theme, its own characters, and we're going to have to connect them all up. But they craft it, and they spent years doing it, and they did it over films, and they have directors coming in, and you can argue about how much creative control maybe they had over it, and you've seen directors come and go, and like Edgar Wright, but they've done a fantastic job of crafting this universe, and it's the universe people want to see.
So I guess the takeaway here is there's a blueprint, right? There is a kind of a grander vision for the way that this extended universe works.
The blueprint's been there since the 70s. The comics are the blueprint, and if you go back and you can look at these old storylines and you look at where they're pulling all the source material from, it's all there. Even the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, it's basically the same storyline, and it's a fascinating thing to sort of extrapolate out what they changed and why they changed it and how trying to make it fit. Again, Civil War, another good one. That comic is a relatively new comic, and beat for beat is basically the same. You know, Iron Man doesn't change his motivation. It's the same motivation he has in the comic book. And the danger is how you can have a film having its own storyline, you know, 3-act structure, beginning, middle, end, and all the rest of it, and yet still feel like it's part of a larger story with its own 3-act structure,
exactly.
beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
Because that's the Infinity Gauntlet is. For years, we're getting little glimpses of Thanos. And then you have something like Guardians of the Galaxy. And like no one would have predicted that Guardians of the Galaxy would be such a massive hit. Because I have some of the Guardians comics at home, and if you read them, they're pretty cosmic and nuts, those comics. They're crazy.
And I think that's one of the secrets of success of the Marvel Extended Universe. They've been quite brave with some of the source material they've chosen to go down, like Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't know how they got that greenlit. They're going to be a talking raccoon with guns, and a tree that only says, "I am Groot." And if you do want some fun, go and watch Vin Diesel record those lines. You can watch the YouTube. It's brilliant.
Does he throw his hands around?
No, he does every single line. He's the voice in all the multi-languages. And
So in the Turkish version, he's Groot with a
I am
Turkish
Groot,
accent.
yeah, but a Turkish accent. No, he changes the lines.
Was it Watashi wa Groot?
Yeah, he does all of that. But he would record like 50, 60 different I Am Groots for every movie.
Is that really necessary?
It's brilliant, that's what it is. But it's not just the bravery in the choice of source material. I think it's quite brave in the choice of directors as well. I think that's one thing that's kept it quite refreshing and managed to keep revitalizing what could get, as you say, you know, it is the 3-act structure, it is a superhero movie. To take someone like Kenneth Branagh to do the Thor movies, to take Taika Waititi to do the
Other Thor movie.
the other Thor movie.
Or movies coming down to the peaks. Our standout films from the various extended universes.
Well, I was going to say, because individually, as much as I enjoy those films, I wouldn't say any one of them is going to be my film of the decade, or even in my list, as much as I love them. But there is one Marvel property that has been on my list, and it's been with me ever since I watched it, and that was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. In animation, and this has always been the case, you can do things which you can't do in a film. You break the logical consistency of a world, of the world, and in this film, it's such a comic book movie to its core. Like the frames, the shading of the actual animation, of the actual texture of the comic book is part of it, and even you get this wonderful connection with the comic book world, and it's multiple worlds.
Well, yeah, let me jump in there because the panels kind of come alive in this film. So the visual style of the film is, at times, it's almost like psychedelic, isn't it?
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, it's
different,
wonderful.
Different images coming at you. You're almost like doing these kind of crossfades between shots. It feels like you're actually experiencing the comic book.
And it's done in such a clever and subtle way. Obviously you get these big sort of crack your head open moments where it's like it smashes you across the face, and it's amazing.
It's a good way to put it, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, like, and you talk about the end of the film, and it's insane and psychedelic, but in a sort of very comprehensible and understandable way, which I think is very, very key and important. But there's a wonderful sort of character element to it as well, because if you look at one of the early scenes where Miles Morales and Peter Parker are escaping from the institute where Doc Ock is chasing them, you can see that Miles Morales, he's discovering his powers. He's not ready for the situation, and yet he's moving at a slightly slower frame rate than 24 frames a second. He looks awkward. He's sort of janky and stilted. Whereas you look at Peter Parker, who's moving at 24 frames a second, very fluid, very natural, and he's teaching them. And as Miles gets better, as he understands his powers, he understands what he can do, his frame rate increases. He becomes more fluid. You can literally see it improving. And this is filled throughout the film, these little moments, and they're playing with the visual concepts across the board, and it's fantastic to watch.
But is the one with the prosciutto man?
Yes, this is the one with prosciutto man.
Okay,
Spider
okay.
Ham, I think is
Spider Ham, yeah.
But you can call him Prosciutto Man if you like.
I like it better.
I mean, I'm on the same comic book page with Di on this one. I saved this for my birthday, and it was just glorious. It's such an immersive experience as well. Like you say, there's those moments where it is crack your head open, stunning animation. And it is silly, and it is daft, but it's really smart as well. It really might not have worked, the kind of high concept thing they go for, but it does, and it not only does it hang together, it just rockets along as well. It keeps you so engaged.
It's also a really funny film. I mean, it was written by the same writer as the Lego Movie, Phil Lord, and it brings this kind of meta humor. It's a really knowing sense of the realities and the difference between the realities that are depicted in the film. So there's the humor, and also the film has a huge amount of heart, and it's again a little bit kind of knowing in the way that it approaches a lot of the sentimentality, but the sentiment is there and you feel for the characters, and I think that Morales' character is someone that I think everyone can relate to.
Honestly, I've been waiting to see Miles Morales in a game, on a screen, just off the page for so long, because if you're talking about Spider-Man, you're talking about Peter Parker, but Miles Morales is Spider-Man for a lot of people, and he is a fantastic character. This is a character that I think is worthy of exploring. I mean, the stories in Spider-Man are amazing. I picked up a bunch of my comics when I went home recently, and I bought one in London years ago. I bought this.
You opened the safe. You remember the combination?
Yeah. Of course, any comic book collector will be like, these are my important comics. So I brought some of my important ones back, and I've got one. And I only bought it because I couldn't believe it when I opened the page. So I bought this in London in the Forbidden Planet. And I opened this page, Spider-Man comic. I was like, I like the front cover. Opened it up, and I didn't know they'd done this. But the first 2-page panel is 9/11. And Spider-Man going, oh God, because he couldn't stop it. And then the pages proceeds of all the sort of relief effort and stuff. And I was like, I can't believe they even did this in a comic book. There are creative risks all over in comic books.
I just think it's the best comic book that we've seen on film this decade.
Well, another film that we all agree, I think, is a worthy superhero film is Black Panther.
Not only is this a superhero with a black lead, this is almost exclusively black cast. And not only is it that, it's the attention to detail they pay in creating the world of Wakanda. It's paying such a deference and homage to a lot of these African nation states as well. Now, whether we need to sit in a room, the 4 white people, and
guilty as charged.
Yeah, and eulogize and try and explain the cultural significance of Black Panther. I don't think we need to do that. But I think we do have to acknowledge this was a significant film in the decade. And it was another first we saw this decade.
And it's one of the most compelling action films for me over the whole decade, because the film has an antagonist, Michael B. Jordan, as Killmonger. This character really works for me because he seems so torn. And it's not a bad guy where the motivation seems to have been added on later. This is somebody who is really struggling with who they are. And yeah, I found him incredible to watch, and much more so than in Creed. I enjoyed Creed, but in this film, I couldn't take my eyes off this guy. It was like when he was on screen, more than the action sequences, I found him really compelling. Oh yes, token white people, Martin Freeman.
I was going to say that. There is
and Andy Serkis. Andy Serkis, of course, yeah.
Good white guy, bad white guy.
If we had more time, I would definitely like to kind of go into the idea of a post-colonial film, because I think that this film is playing with identity and colonial politics in a big way. I mean, the whole idea of Wakanda having a secret force field that protects it, and therefore the rest of the world can't know about its resources, I think is absolutely fascinating. It's there in the comic books, I guess, For me, it was my first encounter with this story, and I really did enjoy it.
I think we have to acknowledge the cast in this film is spectacular. You've got Lupita Nyong'o, Chadwick Boseman,
and Angela Bassett,
who's having so much fun as well,
and Forrest Whitaker, who I always love.
And then you have Martin Freeman.
Martin Freeman.
And I guess
looking lost, which is pretty much what he does. But
yeah, he's particularly British, even though he's playing an American role in it.
That's right. You know what? You're absolutely right. He's a Brit with an American accent acting British.
I mean,
I'm glad you said that.
I think Martin Freeman only does British.
Another historical comedy, The Death of Stalin. This is a film from 2017, and it's a black comedy by the British director Armando Iannucci. Di, I know this is a film that you saw and really loved.
Yeah, this is one of those films that it's really hard to talk about without just endlessly quoting all the funny moments, the funny beats, and just generally talking about how fantastic it is. And if you have any idea about Iannucci's previous work, you'll know that he has a particular style. His dialogue has has weight and crunch and swearing, and it's very, very political. And I think that the most important thing that this film is actually doing is holding up a horrendous mirror to the politics of the day, and deep down we kind of already know he's talking about, like,
well, it's very
modern day.
these are very recognizable characters, even though it's set in 1953.
Yeah.
And the Death of Stalin, the people trying to seek power after he's gone, after that vacuum opens up.
Yeah, and I know it kind of upset a lot of Russians. A lot of media people in Russia were sort of a little bit sort of put out by the film, but really they shouldn't be, because it's not really about any of those actual real-world characters. It's completely about what happens when you have a power vacuum, essentially. What happens when someone like Stalin disappears, and the utter scramble and backstabbing and vitriol and nastiness that comes out of these people, and it comes so easy, and is what's so terrifying and ultimately so funny, is the way they try and screw each other over. It's a fascinating portrayal, and being utterly hilarious at the same time.
So Stalin was irreplaceable.
He was irreplaceable, but so they had to find someone to replace him very, very quickly. And it's just these moments in this film where it's just, oh my God, it's just so funny. Again, it's very easy for me just to launch back into another bit of the film, which is very funny.
And it's a great ensemble cast. There's Steve Buscemi, there's Simon Russell Beale, there's Michael Palin. It has a kind of who's who of not only British comedy, but American comedians as well.
This absolute film-stealing cameo performance from Jason Isaacs. Hello to Jason Isaacs, who's just... he comes in, it has to be done for on a podcast, and it's film, and Jason Isaacs. And he just comes in, and it's so wonderful because there's none of this pretense of keeping up like a Russian accent or anything, and he comes in this broad Yorkshire accent and just destroys everyone in front of him. It's brilliant. But I think, to go back on the earlier point, this is Anucci building on what he'd done with the TV shows, what he did with The Thick of It and Veep, and then into his film In the Loop. This is him just showing the horrific side of politics and as you said, like the power vacuum and how absolute power corrupts. And in this case, he said it in a historical setting, but it doesn't. It's not really, again, about Stalin or this context. But he does use the history so well. He doesn't shy away from how horrific that period was. That balance he manages to strike between the horrific acts that are going on and the absolute, side-splitting comedy is amazing. And I think to compare it to something like Jojo Rabbit, where I did enjoy the film, but a lot of the criticism has been, you can't make this film about the Nazis. Well, apparently Armando Iannucci can make this film about Stalin.
Yeah, and on that point, the film takes a very dark turn toward the end. For a large part, it's people plotting, it's politicians in rooms trying to go through the protocols, the motions, following the death of their revered leader. But as it moves toward the end, you realize that this is a serious game that everyone's playing, and it's life or death. When the film takes that turn, I think that's where it goes from a film that is a kind of satire to something it's much darker, much more serious. There are moments throughout the film where you see people being taken away, and you know that it isn't going to work out well for that particular former patriotic soldier or peasant. But when the film kind of like hits its stride toward the end, it does get very, very dark. And I found myself sort of replaying the last act of the film in my head for days afterwards. It was really affecting.
And I mean this as high praise. It's up there with the last moments of Blackadder, when they finally go over the top. And Blackadder,
good comparison.
And Blackadder, of course, is hilarious and it's historically set, but Blackadder always... you knew the war was happening, but it was that last moment where they go over the top and then it cuts to the poppy fields. That's just perfect. And I think Iannucci, he's credited, as Blackadder as one of his massive influences. You see that all the way through the film. That balancing act that he's done is so fine, and it's just perfect. That's why it has to be one of the films of the decade.
You were talking about Jason Isaacs playing General Zhukov and doing it with this broad Yorkshire accent. But all the actors retain their accents. So you have Steve Buscemi with the American accent and Jeffrey Tambor as well. It doesn't matter that it's not historically accurate. It just adds to the farcical nature of the film. One other thing that I want to quickly mention, and that is the film also has Andrea Riseborough in it. And we talked about her performance in Mandy. I think she was also in the Tom Cruise vehicle Oblivion. Here, she's absolutely unrecognizable. The thing about Andrea Riseborough is that she seems to just become another person. Now, of course, she has the makeup and hair, but at the same time, in this film, compared with her character in Oblivion, where she was a female lead, compared with Mandy, where she was Shelley Duvall. I mean, she really just becomes these characters. Incredible performance. Of the many great horror films that came out over the past 10 years, one really stands out for, I think, all of us, partly because we live here in Japan, and that is, of course, One Cut of the Dead Die.
In Japanese, kamera o tomeru na. Don't stop the camera.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I think I like that more. But one Cut of the Dead is also a very good title.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to sort of preface this one with spoilers, because this is a film that you can't talk about without
Exactly.
ultimately completely ruining the entire experience. So if you haven't seen it, please go and watch it. You won't regret it. It's not even really a horror film. It's a film about films. It's a wonderful experience, and if you watch it, you'll spend the first half of the film going, what on earth were they talking about? I don't understand. This just seems to be a really dodgy film with terrible acting and some questionable special effects. So what on earth is going on? But it's the setup. There's a whole hour of setup to another story which you're not even aware of until you get to it, and this setup is integral to the experience of the film. And then when you get to the ultimate payoff, which is basically a heartwarming story about a father and daughter making a movie together and overcoming all the obstacles that happens when you inevitably do a film where you're trying to do it all in one cut, and it's this coming together of all these people, and the final shot of the film is this wonderful, heartwarming, humanity-justifying experience.
I totally agree. It's a film about making movies. But to me, it's more a meta movie about movies than anything else.
For me, it was a relief. Problem that we see in so many commercial movies in Japan, it's like I'm not the only one who sees it. The bad acting, the exaggerated, the shouting, the uncomfortable plotting. And so for me, it was like there's someone in Japan who actually notices these problems.
So let's do some of the technicals here. It was shot in 8 days. It took 2 days to get the first shots, but it's 37 minutes long. It's wonderful. It's ridiculous.
They did it multiple times too, so...
I think I read they did it 6 times.
Yeah.
And the fact that this film is, when it came out in Japan, it didn't make a huge impact. Some people saw it as a bit of a cult hit, and then it went away to Europe and was seen at all these film festivals. And then it came...
Well, I have to contradict you, Ian, because there was...
I love it when she does that.
There was a word
Just
to
made
mouth.
his day.
There was a word to mouth movement earlier with I'll talk about Cinema Vera. In the same building, there's a cinema, and it was for a month dedicated to this film. And there
Down
was
in Europa.
So Cinema Vera, it's like a fourth floor,
Fourth floor,
and
I think. Third floor?
floor.
Yeah, Europa.
And it was,
I think it's Europa.
and I remember I was watching some other retrospective, and there was a lot of people going up and down, and
Who are these people?
Yeah,
Are they
so
all
I
coming to
was-
see my film noir retrospective?
yeah, exactly. And it was all for this movie that I happened to know this way, not through magazines, not through TV.
I mean, and that's what I mean by not much of a splash. It wasn't all over the TV here. It wasn't
No.
much in the media. But now it really is. It's the poster child for Japanese cinema in many cases. It's all over the streaming sites, adverts and things like that. So this was the director's first feature. Before this, he'd only made a couple of shorts, a little bit of TV stuff. One of his previous shorts, it's got a brilliant title. It's called Rice or Boobs. Which would you choose? Its tagline is...
#priorities.
Its tagline is, what would you choose between rice and boobs if one of these two would disappear from the world forever? The most boring debate in human history starts now.
I want to disappear from this world forever right now.
I really want to see that film. But I think it's your cold, dark heart, Marcus, that didn't see the lovely family moment in this and how heartfelt it is. I mean, yes, it is about filmmaking and...
Yeah, I have
that
to-
wasn't my takeaway.
I have to agree with this, because the thing that spoiled a little bit for me was the heartwarming finale.
Yeah, literally the last 2 shots of the films are full screen shots of the dad smiling and laughing, and then the daughter smiling and laughing.
But it is a glorious film, and as Di said earlier, if you don't know anything about it and you haven't seen it, don't read about it, just go and see it.
It's too late now.
It's too late, it is everywhere, but it took me completely by surprise. I was not expecting this. The other lovely moment that has come from this film is now myself and Di drink in the One Cut of the Dead bar. And what's really fortunate is it's about a 10-minute walk from my house.
So, how convenient.
Well, they have the posters everywhere, and in our very bad Japanese, Di's excused, he's not been here this long, but I should have much better. And we tried to ask, why do you have all these One Cut of the Dead posters? So we think that her answer was the director drinks there. But we have no idea if it's the real director, the guy playing the director, the person that was supposed to be the director.
One thing that worries me about this film is that so much of it is until the reveal. So I haven't rewatched it ever since. One thing that I'm curious about is how this film is going to be on the second vision.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Because even I, watching it for the first time, was like, this is a bit ropey. Like, 20 minutes
right?
in,
Yeah,
going,
yeah.
Oh, I don't know about this. And you kind of have to stick with it. I mean, and I'm so glad I did, but it's kind of like, it's the reward you get. And you need every moment of that initial film. Every bit is referenced because you see the events, again, from another perspective. You need those little moments. And even like the little bits where you think, well, that was a bit odd. Where'd that arm come from flying off screen? And what happened in that? That was a really weird choice. Why did they make that choice?
I felt the same way, but I'd spoken at this stage, I think I'd already spoken to you guys, and you were like, stick with it, you've got to keep watching. At the same time, it's also a great hangover movie in the fact that it is kind of, as you said, ropey, it's cheesy, and you're thinking, maybe this isn't going to hold together, but there must be something here. Yes, it gets way, way more interesting. Stick with it. Moving on to one of my very favourite films from the last decade, Toni Erdmann from 2016. German consultant Ines Conradi reluctantly agrees to spend time with her estranged father when he unexpectedly arrives in Bucharest. Ever the practical joker, Ines's father does his best to reconnect by pretending to be her CEO's life coach. Director Marian Ade's film is wickedly funny. It's a two-hander and explores the relationship between Ines and her father, played by Sandra Hüller and Peter Simonashek, respectively. There are three reasons why I love this film. First, the humor. In lesser hands, this father visits daughter in disguise shtick would be soppy, sentimental. Instead, Ade's absolutely hilarious script focuses on the character's desperation to generate laughter. Next, the narrative twist. The story doesn't follow a tried and true three-act structure. Rather, the situations seem to spring very naturally from the characters themselves. And the third thing that's great about this film is the way it creates strong empathy for the characters. So we relate to Ines despite or perhaps because of her soul-destroying job. Similarly, it's impossible not to love her father, Winfried, no matter how far he goes in order to be with his daughter.
The things I loved about this film is every time you think the father's learnt his lesson and there's no further he can go, he goes further and further. It's great.
The way this film is structured, it's all about their relationship and it's always kind of being pushed along by their characters. There are twists and turns in this plot that you just could never predict. And I know, having read a bit about the making of the film, that it took a long, long time to write. And it shows because it's a little bit like the Game of Thrones thing. George R.R. Martin, why is it taking him so long? We should talk about that in the past tense. Why is it taking him so long to write the next book? The reason is that he works from the characters and plots from there. It's not that he's got a plot and therefore the characters are going to follow that. The script just springs out of the characters, their needs, their wants, and sometimes their very kind of base needs. Maria, you enjoyed the film, I know that.
I enjoyed immensely the film. There are moments of deep awkwardness, and they're the most relatable ones. I think about the scene when the father finally agrees to leave Bucharest. And I think they call a taxi or something. And there's this scene where the daughter sees that he takes a taxi, but it's a moment of extreme sadness also.
I have only seen the film right through once at a film festival maybe 5 years ago when it first came out. But I remember that scene distinctly, that the taxi drives away and then we see her, she's on the balcony and the camera lingers on her while she, I think, she kind of comes to the terms with the fact that there goes her dad and Dad's not very happy, and does she feel guilty? We're sort of projecting onto her maybe our own feelings as an audience, but the camera does sit on her. The film has time to breathe while we kind of think about where she's at in her life.
I think that's one of the great things about the film. I mean, it is very long, but it's justifiable in its length. As you spend so long with these characters, you get to see their edges. You
Right.
see everything about them, and you get to form. Like, it gives you enough time to sort of empathize with one character, and then fall out of love with them, and fall in love with another one, and you go in and out, and it's so character driven. In terms of Maria talking about the level of cringe, I was not prepared for that end scene.
And you feel like protective of them. You're like, don't go there. Especially with the father, don't go with the prank. But he goes there.
Yeah, put the teeth away.
This is certainly a film, if you can go in without knowing too much about it, without any spoilers, that's a very good move.
I mean, that's what I had. Like, both of you two had kind of raved about the film, but you hadn't told me much about it. So I only
Well,
watched.
I'm not going to summarize a 3-hour film over a drink.
We drink a lot, though. But from the opening scene, I just thought, what's going on here? What are they getting me to watch now? And I have had that moment several times with things you've recommended, but just straight from the opening scene with the delivery guy, and he goes back in, and he comes back out with the handcuffs and looking completely different. You're like, what's going on? What is this?
The school thing where everybody, I know it's Halloween or whatever, and they're all
I don't
wearing
think it is
makeup.
Halloween. I think he's just mental.
And you'll never listen to Whitney Houston the same way again.
That's brilliant. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, it's a real iconic scene somewhere in the middle of the film. I described it as a two-hander, but there are a number of other characters who appear briefly. Some of them come back. The boss at the company.
The intern.
The junior, yeah.
The
I
junior.
feel so sorry for that intern in
Yeah.
that final scene when she shows up at the door
Yes,
and you're like,
yes, I know exactly
oh
the scene you're
my
referring to. Better not spoil
God.
that one. There are a number of times where that film just seems to veer off and go in a very unexpected direction.
It goes into farce and it's cringy, and then it keeps going so far into the cringe and the farce that it comes out the other side. It's like Albert Camus, the only answer to absurdity is to be absurd. That's where it goes. It's ridiculous, but it's brilliant in
Yeah,
its
it's a fantastic
ridiculousness.
description because it really does kind of just keep pushing those characters further and further and trying to explore, as you said, the edges of their characters.
And that bit, again, I keep talking about the closing scene, but it's gonna stay with me for a long time. Where you think this can't get any more ridiculous, and then the father shows up, and then they go outside, and it's brilliant.
Well, this film was going to be remade by, I think Paramount had the rights. Back in 2017, Kristen Wiig and Jack Nicholson were cast in the lead roles. I believe that Jack Nicholson is back on I'm Retired, and Kristen Wiig may still be attached to the film. I haven't heard anything lately. It may just be stuck in development hell. It may never happen. I cannot imagine this being remade in the States because so much of it seems to be about these particular kind of European characters.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of people would make the cheap joke here about a German comedy. And then, of course, it is German, but it doesn't feel German. It feels very European. And the way that they keep going out of English and German into French.
And the fact that
some
it's shot in
different languages.
in Bucharest, yeah.
And it doesn't go for any low-hanging fruit. There's no stereotypes or things like that. It's so well played.
One quote that I saw online, Ade was explaining that her reason for shooting in Bucharest was that she'd seen some really interesting Romanian films lately and wanted to shoot in Bucharest. That was it. And now a very recent entry to the list, Noah Baumbach's Netflix film from just the end of the year.
So Baumbach explored the theme of divorce before, notably in The Squid and the Whale, which was a tale through the eyes of the kids, and it was more of a bleak film. And this film is incredible how it can mix mood. And there's element of slapstick comedy, and I think Noam Baumbach in an interview quoted To Be or Not to Be, or 20th Century, both with Carol Lombard. This film has an incredible pacing from the actors. It's almost exaggerated to say, but joyous element. What do you think, Ian?
And that was something I was going to say as well. I think it's such a it does such a great job of showing the complexities and the subtleties of like a relationship falling apart, and like no one hates each other. There's still a lot of love there, and everyone's conflicted, and they just want to do the best, not just for themselves, occasionally for themselves, but also for each other. But yeah, that it could be very bleak. It could be a very difficult film to watch. But there are, especially in the performances, there's so many little moments of joy, and even a little bit of redemption. And yeah, I found it's a very sweet film. But in no way is it cheesy. It's quite honest and quite raw as well.
I have not yet seen the film. How does it maintain the joy when it's a divorce story?
The relationship with the kid is great. They both are obviously very good parents. Maybe they're not very good in a marriage itself, but as parents, they're great. Especially Scarlett Johansson's character. There are moments of fun for her, like when she's singing with her mother and her sister, and when she's playing with the kid. She's very playful in this film. Their relationship, at several points, you think it's completely broken and they can't come back from that. But they kind of do because they have to. It's a very modern story. They have to maintain a relationship because they have a child. Like I keep saying, they don't hate each other. There's still some love there. There's some lovely little scenes when she has the power cut at the house and he has to go over and help. There's almost a moment where you think, oh, are they getting back together? When they're obviously not, and it's not that kind of story.
I didn't have those moments, but what I found really entertaining was some scenes that were so absurd. I'm thinking about the scene at her house in Los Angeles when Scarlett Johansson is trying to make her sister serve
the divorce papers.
The divorce paper, and it's hilarious.
Oh, her mother is a piece of work as well.
and the sister to Marriott Weaver was this nervous actress who hates auditions, and she's treating the whole thing as an audition. It's so hilarious. And one other thing is the scene with the social worker.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh, that's so awkward and so funny.
That's so awkward. It's almost sort of Tony Erdmann levels.
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And that social worker, Jesus, she's weird, intensely weird person.
And I admire Noah Baumbach, the growth that he has in this decade for films. And I think this script is so mature. It's perfect because it contains all the contradiction of the single character. So the Adam Driver, who is this incredibly loving father, but he's also the most narcissistic man. So he practically, without acknowledging, he has been suffocating this wife, this woman life and thought.
Yeah, I really want to talk about Adam Driver's performance in this
Yeah.
as well, because initially when I first watched Adam Driver in something, I wasn't a huge fan. I thought it was a little bit one note, and then I find his face not particularly expressive, but I think that's just his face. I don't think that's an acting choice. But in this film, he really goes through quite a journey here, which I know it sounds cheesy to say, but he really does, and I think he's getting to the point by the end of the film where he is starting to realize how much of this he's culpable for.
Yeah, we follow him in this kind of Kafkaesque journey where everything that he is certain of is not anymore. So he thinks that it's a New York-based family, but it turns out that their life was centered in Los Angeles. So everything from the legal point of view, from the relationship, and we see him completely lost and then come back, probably renewed, a better man, hopefully.
Much as I think Adam Driver's spectacular in this, and I do love his journey, Scarlett Johansson is just superb.
She is so superb. She's so good.
Such a downbeat compliment, but she plays ordinary so well.
Yeah.
One issue I have with Adam Driver is I always think, wow, that's a really good performance from Adam Driver. With Scarlett Johansson, I forgot it's Scarlett Johansson. She's so good at
I felt
playing.
she was so relatable when she's obviously angry, but her soon-to-be ex-husband doesn't get it. And then she's like, whatever, and she closes the door. And as a woman, you know that there's so much of unsaid, I don't have time to explain to you. So I felt that was one of the most relatable role that she had.
I think she's fantastic in it. You thoroughly believe that this is a mother going through a divorce, just trying to hold it together and trying to carve out a little bit of her own life that I think she'd lost.
Yeah. And also a woman that's been gaslighted. So New York was a kind of a prison because it was not her world. It was the world that her husband carved up for her and doesn't realize that. He thinks that everything is all right. And she, with the physical distance and let's say with the sun of Los Angeles, of California.
The space.
The space.
They always talk about the space.
She discovers herself. I mean, the whole first encounter at the lawyer. Yeah, can we talk about Laura
Can we
Dern?
talk about
Yeah.
Laura Dern, yeah.
And when she is starting to tell her side of the story, and she realizes that for the first time, I think it was superbly written.
Laura Dern's having a whale of a time in this film. And I think you can definitely, and it's credit to Noah Baumbach for doing this, he involved them in the script writing process. And it's very brave of him to bring them on at such an early stage, but because he's done that, everyone is just in their own genuine voice. It's not a particularly acty film. You just feel that this is them inhabiting those characters.
Next up, Shoplifters, Japanese film that we've spoken about on the show quite a bit. Ian, I know you're a great fan of this film.
Not just of the film, of the director himself. Like Koreeda, I think, is just a wonderful, wonderful director. I'm going to try to get through this segment without crying, but this film had...
Good luck, Ian.
Yeah, this film had a profound effect on me, so... I have to say, the first time I watched it, it just broke me in half. It's so heartbreaking. I think Koreeda is such a master of letting his stories develop and giving his actors kind of space and time to grow and tell their own story. All the cast are spectacular. But I think, again, it's the performance from the kids that we know he's famous for in things like I Wish and his previous films. But the performance he gets from these kids is just remarkable. The one scene where Lynn, and I feel very, very strongly about this, her name is Lynn, not any of the names her biological parents gave to her. The one scene where her biological mother says to her, "Oh, come here and I'll buy you some clothes." And Lynn says, "No, I cheered." The fact that that little girl can be so powerful and brave and strong at that age is just remarkable, but it's not fair that she's had to grow up that quickly. And I know I have a daughter very similar age, and I find it, see, I'm going now, I find it very difficult to talk about this film because of the effect it has.
Well, the child performances that Koreeda gets are just extraordinary, and he seems to have a particular knack in all his films of being able to draw out great performances from kids, and they're not stylized and the sort of performances that you get from somebody who's been auditioning all their life. A lot of the time, I think these kids don't have experience working as actors.
No, a lot of these are first-time actors in something like I Wish. He originally had written the story for a brother and a sister, and then when he was in Osaka, he found these two Monzai brother comedians and instantly cast them and rewrote the film. I know his traditional approach is not to script the film particularly heavily. It's to give the actors notes of where to go and the points they have to hit and then let them go loose. I know in this film he kind of did it slightly differently. He played out the scenes on table reads and then let them improvise and then wrote a script. So he's a little bit more controlled in this.
I'm a super fan of Koreeda as well, but what I really love about his films is that it's probably the first one or the one in a long time that tells the Japan that Japan doesn't want to tell. So the poverty, the everyday struggle. So Shoplifter, from the plot point of view, it's a genius film because it combines a lot of the things that you can read on actual newspapers.
He has the ability to take headlines and to combine them and create a story. And not only create a story, but also bring in characters who are very empathetic. It feels like he knows exactly where he wants things to go in terms of the story. But they are literally headlines that we see here in the Japan Times where some elderly person has died. Their also elderly child is using their pension to survive. You know, stories about people working day labor jobs and then going home and you know, just barely surviving on the money that they make day to day. So all of that is in this one film.
The social satire that he can pull off, it's really outstanding.
Yeah.
Particularly in Shoplifter, I loved the good people. The good people is the people with a higher pitch of voice, is the face of talento, the face of TV actors. But in other words, they're monsters because they give
so
up
the right thinking. Isn't it?
They give right back to a family that's abusive, their little girl, without understanding that the fake family was the one that really thought about the happiness of the child.
Just on that point, I mean, Japan, and we've talked about this previously on other films as well, Japan has a very strong civil service and there are rules.
Yeah.
There are regulations and compliance and things that everybody needs to conform to. And the rules may not be humane, but they're rules and everyone has to adhere to them. So what we see here is that the police are following the rules, they're doing what they're meant to do. The child, in this case the abused child, returns to her parents because it's right to reunite a child with their parents. We know from what's revealed to the audience is that this child is suffering.
And the ending, we know that this child is doomed, that it's going to be a life of solitude, of violence, and the heartbreak that you feel at the end of the film.
But conversely, I mean, it's an incredibly funny film as well. It is a satire. While it's based on real events, possibly even real people, it does show us the humor and your favorite word, Ian, joy of the lives of the characters living together in the family.
And them finding their own joy. I mean, they have so little, but the father, and I'm doing air quotes because it's very difficult to use those kind of terms in this film, but the fact he can create so much fun and joy for the kids when they have nothing. But then ultimately, he is a flawed character.
He's a man who breaks into vehicles, and these guys, they're living a life of crime, but they're crimes that are born of desperation. They're not thrill rides.
Well, they're supposed to be victimless crimes, and there's that amazing line from the shopkeeper when he says to the young boy, "Don't make your sister do that."
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh
Which
yeah,
is
the
killer bit, by the way.
And the victims in these crimes are the children and the families themselves, because they have to do this in order to survive.
But society as a whole, I mean, society is to blame in this film, and
Yeah.
that's the genius of it, is that you realize that all of society bears some responsibility for what happens in the film. Sorry.
And what I love about this film is the independent education that the boy is getting. So you see him slowly taking distance from what the father is doing and realizing by himself that probably is not according to moral.
This isn't the way it should be.
Yeah, and ultimately this leads to
Consequences.
But I love how this kid is learning by himself and slowly not taking for granted or taking for right because his father is doing it.
I also want to say all of the performances were spectacular in this film, but it was also, was it Kiki's last film?
Kiki Kirin's last film, yes.
And I think
Yes.
it's a fitting tribute to like someone that has such a body of work as well, that this is her last performance. And she gets to say goodbye in the film as well.
Yeah. And what you gradually see in Koreeda's film is he gets the courage, maybe the budget, to cast someone that's not TV related, not good looking, not cool, and gaining from it. The protagonist, Lily Franklin, who is graphic illustrator, but also an actor, but he's not been the obvious choice as a protagonist, as a hero. And the choice of him is really what's successful about this film.
I mean, if we're talking about the film that had the biggest emotional impact on me this decade, it's this film by a country mile. It was going to stay with me forever. I'm still not okay now, as you can tell with my voice going again. But I think, not just for this film, but for his body of work, I think Koreeda deserves his place among the masters of cinema.
So when putting together our list, we came to something of an impasse. Which Scorsese film would you put on the list of the best films of the decade? Maria?
I would definitely put Wolf of Wall Street. Scorsese knows how to do Scorsese. And in this film, he does it at the maximum.
This is maximum Scorsese. For you.
Yeah, so the...
But Joe Pesci's not in it, Maria.
I know, but it's like the voiceover, the explanation of the lifestyle of, in this case, Jordan Belfort, diet of drugs, which to take. And there's a scene where DiCaprio talks to the audience and let us in the lifestyle of essentially what, a trader?
What he is essentially is a salesman.
Yeah.
And he's selling nothing.
Yeah, so Scorsese is always defined like the gangster auteur, but he is someone who knows how a world functions and tells us the rules, tells us the do's and the don'ts, pretty much like he explained us the New York of the 19th century in the Age of Innocence. And he does the same with finance, with scandal, and basically international money laundering.
One of my most iconic moments of the decade is Matthew McConaughey in Wolf of Wall Street beating his chest with Leonardo DiCaprio sitting there going, what is going on?
I have to admit that there are times where I have been out where I've said, okay, bring me a cocktail, and in 7 minutes bring me another one.
Keep them coming.
Keep them coming.
But it's
This
lovely
is so iconic.
Well, it's lovely in that scene as well because it's improvised by Matthew McConaughey. He was doing it in rehearsals. He just started doing it. It's just a little mantra he has himself. And Scorsese's like, okay, that has to go in the film. But they didn't warn DiCaprio he was going to do it. So that look from DiCaprio of, what are you doing now, is fully honest.
And while the script is there, it's Terence Winter's script, the writer of Boardwalk Empire. They are obviously given the freedom to go off, explore their characters, improvise around the situations.
And amazingly, Margot Robbie's given something to do. Unlike Tarantino, she's actually given a role and something to play in this film.
Well,
So-
I mean, that's the breakout picture for her. I mean, that's where she became the big film star that she is now.
She's a star that has risen in the end of this decade
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
be the fully fledged movie star she is. What would be your pick, Marcus, in our Scorsese section?
I love Wolf of Wall Street, and I think that the film is the standout Scorsese picture. As Maria was saying, this is the film which is the most kind of Scorsese-esque of the movies that he put out over the last decade. But the film that I think really surprised me was Silence. It surprised me because for a film that had so much press about it being a religious film, a film that had screened for the Pope, that Scorsese had been wanting to make for years, it actually was a film that went in different directions. And beyond the thematics and the fact that it's as much interested about colonialism as it is anything else, it also has an outstanding performance from Issei Ogata, the Japanese, I think he's a theater actor, Maria.
It's mainly a theater actor, but also cinema. And here he really acts like the abusive figure in the Japanese politics. His performance is really great.
As were some of the other performances. The actor playing, I don't know the name of the performer, but the actor playing the translator.
Tadanobu Asano is a star.
It's another really solid performance in the film, working in both Japanese and English.
In English, yeah. What struck me in this film is the final sense of defeat that probably a lot of people experience living in the system Japan that's so much stronger than the will of change, the initiative. We talked about the rules in Japan, and they ultimately win everything. So this sense of almost like defeat is what I captured in the film.
Certainly, if you're considering seeing the film, but have your doubts because a 3-hour religious epic is not your cup of tea, just remember, this is a Scorsese film. It's a film by an absolute master and someone who has really spent a lot of time thinking about Japanese films, and it's all there on the screen.
And I am one of those people that are guilty of not seeing this, and I have to say it is the Scorsese one I'm most interested in catching up on. But we cannot get out of Scorsese Street without talking about The Irishman, and I know we waxed, well, you two waited in the cold and waxed lyrical about this on the Tokyo Film Festival episode. As I say, we can't not mention it. It's such a zeitgeist film. Where does The Irishman sit in this?
I think The Irishman, the way that it certainly set itself up to be is the bookend of the gangster films that Scorsese has made throughout his career. Now, whether this is the last of the gangster films, well, we'll have to wait and see. But it's an incredibly good film, and it's a solid work. My one issue with it, of course, is the facial reconstructions for the actors. Ultimately, in such a kind of well-written, well-acted film, that becomes a smaller point because you
stop caring about them.
Yeah, you just get over it. And there's enough going on that you really don't have time to kind of sit and think, gee, those wrinkles around Robert De Niro's eyes are getting bigger and smaller. Moving on, Hell or High Water from 2016. Toby and his brother Tanner, an ex-convict, resort to robbing banks as they can't afford their mortgage payments anymore. Everything goes as planned until the police catch up. Directed by David Mackenzie from a script by Taylor Sheridan, the actor-screenwriter who wrote the script for Sicario. The film features some standout performances, in particular, Ben Foster as bank robber Tanner Howard. Foster plays Tanner as a loose cannon constantly threatening to explode and take out everyone else around him. There's also another brilliant performance from Jeff Bridges. I think it's fair to say that all of the performances in this film are excellent.
This tobacco chewing kind of... It's not probably chewing tobacco, but it feels like it's chewing tobacco. I love it. It's the best thing.
Well, I mean,
after
he puts the grizzled in grizzled cop, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He really brings a strong sense of character to this West Texas policeman. The thing that really makes this a great Western, and possibly the best Western, and then be controversial words, you can write into me and complain, but I think it is the best Western of the last 10 years. It owes a lot to the Westerns of old, the 1960s, 1950s, but also it had me thinking a lot about No Country for Old Men. Whereas No Country for Old Men is a noir, this film is a more traditional Western. It's about two brothers and the trust or the lack of trust between them and how their characters develop over time and through extraordinary circumstances where their characters go.
And it's about a couple cop.
It's also a buddy film. It's in a sense where one of the two buddy cops is this kind of old grizzled lawmaker played by Jeff Bridges. His partner is half Mexican, half Native American. So at the center of the film, you have the relationship between these two brothers, these two bank robbers. But there's also another kind of double act in the film. That's Jeff Bridges as this kind of hard-bitten lawmaker in West Texas, and his partner, and that's Alberto Parker, played by Gil Birmingham. These two guys are, you can't say hot on the trail of the thieves. They're very slow on the trail of the thieves. It's played quite seriously. While the film has a lot of great dialogue, and there's some incredibly funny expository dialogue at the beginning of the film, where everybody is in some kind of argument while explaining what's going on in the film.
Yeah, there's a great line in it where Alberto says to his partner, "You know I'm part Mexican, right?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm going to get to that when I'm done with the Indian insults, but it's going to be a while."
Just awful. I mean, but every line, every one of Taylor Sheridan's lines in this, it tells you something about the character. They're funny, but they also show you where the characters are going. And sometimes the characters are developing in ways that you wouldn't expect them to. And without getting into plot spoilers, there's a long way for him to go before he's really at the time to step down. So Jeff Bridges' character, there's a lot in common really with Tommy Lee Jones's character from No Country for Old Men.
The coffee guy.
The boss man, yeah. Because he's a cop who's about to step down, but his education as a police officer is not yet over.
While we're on the topic of westerns, though, my favourite western of the decade is a bit of an odd pick, but it would be Logan, the end of the Wolverine story. I know to pick an X-Men film as a western's a bit odd, but a lot of people didn't want to go and watch it because they don't like the X-Men. But it's not a comic book story, even though it comes from a comic book. It's an old western. It's the lone.
I think that's truly a western.
Yeah, it's the lone gunman at the end of his life. It's brilliant, and I think Hugh Jackman had to fight quite hard to actually get this particular story made. And it's just a perfect end to that Wolverine story. No one else should be allowed to play Wolverine after this, but it is worth it for Patrick Stewart's opening line in the film, and I cannot repeat it here, but it's glorious to hear Patrick Stewart swear with such conviction.
And let's not forget that the director, James Mangold, he directed 3:10 to Yuma, or the remake of 3:10 to Yuma. So, I mean, he does have pedigree as a Western director. Next, Phantom Thread from 2017, the Paul Thomas Anderson film. It's a period romantic drama set in the haute couture world of London in the 1950s. It stars Daniel Day-Lewis as a dressmaker who takes a young waitress played by Vicky Krieps as his muse. It's supposedly Daniel Day-Lewis's final role before retirement. Maria, would you like to have Reginald Woodcock as your tailor?
I think he would be so severe with me. He will probably regret designing.
Regret it immediately.
Immediately.
I would pay good money to watch Maria and Mr. Woodcock have the argument. But no,
I can only imagine the things that he would resent me for.
So what we're stepping into here is that Reginald Woodcock, the Daniel Day-Lewis character, is this very fastidious dressmaker, somebody who has rules. There are rules in his house, and you must abide by those rules.
Especially at breakfast. Not too much movement at breakfast.
His character is a really interesting one, and someone I don't think we've ever seen on film before, because Woodcock is also prone to taking on lovers, bringing them into the house, introducing them to the lifestyle of the house, before casting them back out into the street.
Well, having his sister cast them out into the street.
Yeah, and that's a great lead into introducing Leslie Manville's character.
Oh, she's great.
Manville plays Woodcock's sister,
Cyril.
And
she can tell you to
keep it clean, Maria.
she can tell you she's gonna kill you, but sipping her tea like nothing happened.
Leslie Manville gives a really measured performance as Cyril. For a large part of the film, she manages the house while Woodcock, her brother, demands everybody's attention at all times. So while Daniel Day-Lewis's character is holding court with members of minor royalty, making their dresses for them, Manville's character, Cyril, is in the house managing the affairs. And you get a very strong sense that without Cyril, he's nothing. I mean, he could not survive in the real world. And this is reinforced with the introduction of Vicky Krieps' character, Alma.
Now, this film really shows how men's fastidiousness can survive, because there are women, they are guarding it, they are allowing it. Because you see, all this world, as you said, of rules is preserved.
Well, you get a sense that this is a house of cards without Cyril. That without Cyril, everything would fall to pieces.
Oh, yes.
The whole film is measured. It's measured to an inch of its life with the tape they used for the dresses, for everything. It is, but at the heart of the film, it's about the power dynamics between these three characters. how it shifts and where it goes to. And no, I don't want to spoil the end, but even the end is fascinating.
What my mother described as very strange.
I will say the end sat a little odd with me as well. I wasn't quite sure that's where we were going to go, but I think I enjoyed it.
From the reading I've done around the film, where the film goes is the original beginnings of the concept for the movie.
But I think we have to talk about Daniel Day-Lewis. He's acting with every fibre of
The
his
newly
body.
retired Daniel Day-Lewis.
We'll see. But he's acting with every fibre of his body. Even his hair is acting. But you don't see that, though, on screen. You just see him being this character. And he did his usual thing. He learned how to make dresses. He spent 6 months.
Well, one of the details that I love is his hands. His hands is... He's been sewing for a lot of
No, I was
months.
wondering if that was a hand double or not.
No, it's
No,
him.
I think it's
Really?
not a hand double.
He
He wouldn't
learned-
allow it.
He learned to make the dresses. He wouldn't do the film until he could make one of those dresses. And you know what he's like. He will have gone and learned how to make these dresses.
So why is this on our list, Maria?
For me, this film is hypnotic. I loved it when I first saw it, and it's the film where the more I saw it 3 times, the more I saw it, the simpler it got me.
You
for
saw
me.
it 3 times. I'm doing the recount of the plot.
I love the detail. I love how you can sort of drift along really a feast for eyes.
I know exactly what you're saying. In terms of production design, it looks like something that Edith Head did for Hitchcock. I mean, it really has that 50s, sumptuous 50s
There's
look.
a lot of reference to Hitchcock, notably the scene where Daniel Day-Lewis is looking through a keyhole. This is so psycho. And there is the psychological cruelty that's so contrasty with the elegance of the decor, of the fabric, of the cuts.
Yeah, in terms of the detail and the dresses and how beautiful it looks, it really reminded me of The Danish Girl. And when he's touching the fabric, and it's quite a sensual film in such strange ways, because it is very British and very starched and
Emotionally detached, but
sensuous.
sensually, sensuous, yeah.
There's also some wonderful dialogue in this movie. One thing about Paul Thomas Anderson is that he really is the writer-director. I mean, he doesn't just shoot the film, edit the film, he writes the film, and he has a really great ability with dialogue as well.
You forget he's American in this film. It's so British.
Yeah, the fact that it's set in London and you know, he has the benefit of being an outsider looking in, so he can talk about some of the English food. What is it, Toad in the Hole or something? No, it's Welsh Rabbit.
yeah.
The spectacular breakfast.
Oh, there's many spectacular breakfasts. They're great.
One of the things that strikes you when you watch it a couple of times is how breakfasts are one of the act. So you see the structure very clearly. So you have many breakfasts. The pivotal moment, because it's when the creativity of Reynolds is unleashed. So it's the moment that you should respect the most from an outsider.
Yeah, I've never seen buttering of toast be so offensive. Like you say, Marcus, some of the lines are amazing. The line about the tea, he says the tea is going out, but the interruption is staying right here with me. It's just spectacular.
Yeah.
And when his sister says, "Don't pick a fight with me," it's great. I think they're back and forth. The bristling sort of, not insults, because they're too British to ever insult each other directly, although we do get that later. Just their back and forth is wonderful.
Yeah, you wonder what Cyril has. I mean, what is keeping her there? Because she's so capable, she could survive anywhere. Maybe she knows that, or maybe she hopes that her brother needs her once Elmo arrives.
Well, I thought that was nodded to when he talks about the story when he first was talking to Alma. Is he talks about when women didn't want to make wedding dresses because it meant you'd never get married. And she says, "Well, did your sister ever get married?" He's like, no. I thought that's a lovely nod towards she's given herself to him.
Symbiotic relationship that they have.
One other thing I wanted to mention is the music in this film, because it's Johnny Greenwood once again working with Paul Thomas Anderson, and again he can't get an Oscar nomination because that weird technicality, because he played it live once. I'd listen to anything Johnny Greenwood does. He gives me these funny feelings in my nether regions.
I think it's a character in the movie, the music.
Well, yeah, absolutely. In this film in particular, more so than even in The Master, the music actually suggests where to go, gives you the emotional structure of the entire film. It's a very different film, I think, if you take the music out.
Yeah.
Another favorite of mine from the decade is Arrival from 2016. The Denis Villeneuve science fiction film. A linguist works with the military to communicate with alien life forms after 12 mysterious spacecraft appear around the world. I love that line because that synopsis doesn't tell us really anything about the movie.
Yeah, and don't, if no one's seen this.
It's not a film that should be spoiled. I mean, like so many of the other films on this list, the more you know about it, the more damage you'll do to your enjoyment of the film, probably.
Well, I had a lovely moment with this. For some reason, it passed me by the first time when it first came out. And we were out one night, I think 3 of us were out one night, and I said I hadn't seen it. And you, Marcus, almost sent me home at that moment to go and watch it. And then I did go and watch it the next day, but you
Your
refused.
homework, Ian.
Yeah, it was more than homework. You adamant I had to go and see it now. But you didn't tell me anything about it. And I knew nothing before it, but it's
Good work, Marcus.
It's completely in my wheelhouse. It's intelligent sci-fi. I love sci-fi. I'm that weird guy that watches all those weird alien videos on YouTube and stuff as well. But also, I'm a psych graduate, so this is psycholinguistics and Chomsky's acquisition of language. It's
And I
fascinating.
think without going into too much detail, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think this film appeals to a particular audience. It appeals to people who are interested in language, just love science fiction, or are interested in the idea that we're not alone in the universe and that a science fiction film doesn't have to be a space opera in order to kind of be both intellectually and emotionally engaging.
I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. The people that love this film really love this film. After watching it, I went and you can download the font, and I won't say any more than that, but you can go and get the font that's used. When I say love it, I mean to the point where one of my very good friends, Jess, she has some of the alien language tattooed on her arm because she fell in love with it so much. It's such a smart and well-structured film, and it goes places you don't expect.
Yeah, and the structuring, I mean, again, this is one of those areas where we've got to be careful to spoilers, but the structure of the film is really interesting because it doesn't follow a linear structure.
I think that's as far as we want to go on that.
And what it does is it moves backwards and forwards in time, and characters come together and fall apart, and you don't necessarily know at any exact moment what the state of the characters are.
And it's also hard.
And I mean, it's not The Witcher. I think it actually is a lot easier to follow, but at the same time, yeah, it doesn't follow a kind of linear narrative.
But it's also heartbreaking as well. I think Amy Adams' portrayal in it is wonderful. She's so strong, but also broken.
I think that performance, one of the real tragedies is I don't think she was even nominated for the Oscars, at least. I was just blown away by her performance in this film. So we began the show with a film from the beginning of the decade, and we're going to conclude with a movie that has only recently come out, and that is Parasite.
Yeah, just to sum it up, jobless, penniless, and above all hopeless, the unmotivated Ki-Tak and his equally unambitious family occupy themselves with working for peanuts and in their squalid basement-level apartment. Through a business opportunity, they manage to ingratiate themselves into this incredibly wealthy family, and then hijinks ensue.
Hijinks definitely ensue.
And some low jinks.
So this is a film that has been universally adored by critics and audiences. It's really found a broad audience, and that kind of surprised me, given that it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Usually those films, festival-type films that play to a particular type of audience, like the New York, LA audience. Here, Bong Joon-ho's film has really found broad appeal. That's something that took me by surprise. Why do you think audiences have found it so exciting?
Well, the incredible inventiveness of the movie. It's like being struck by lightning. It's so funny and creative and really comes from a place that you don't expect. I don't know who did the marketing, but kudos to everyone who managed to keep the secret. Because I personally watched it without any back information. And this is so rare in this time. And when you live in a country like Japan, when the film is usually released late, and Parasite was released pretty late, to be able to watch it without any spoilers, any information was really precious to me.
It's weird to say that a Korean film about sort of down and outs has got such universal appeal, but it really does. It refuses to pick a genre, and often that kind of leaves you with a bit of a mishmash of a film, but this isn't a mishmash at all.
Yeah,
it works perfectly.
Yeah, it works as a genre film, like as a heist film in a way, because the family are gradually kind of moving in one by one into the wealthy family's house. As they do this, it plays like a heist film. It's got that kind of Soderbergh excitement of watching people play out their plot. It's working perfectly. And there's one particular montage about a third into the film where
No spoilers, Marcus.
where they push out one member of the household. The way that this plays out is absolutely brilliant in terms of its humor, in terms of showing us the personalities of the people running the con. The film then turns into a kind of Hitchcock suspense drama. Still very, very funny, but director Bong Joon-ho has this ability to kind of like turn on a dime and go from the Hitchcockian thing into a comic scene and then into something with more pathos. He's really good at just sort of twisting from one genre beat to the next, or one trope to the next.
I thought it was amazing because at first I thought we're in like Shoplifters territory, and then we're in Ocean's 11, and like you say, then we're into Hitchcock, and it's still got that wonderful thing that I think you find in especially in his films, but also Korean cinema, of it's kind of this morality tale where there's going to be a reveal. You know, there's going to be at least one, maybe several. It's just a masterpiece, truly breathtaking masterpiece.
Yeah, and it definitely deserves to be on the best of the decade list.
Oh, that's definitely, and the pacing, like to be able to do that many things, we're still giving enough space to all of the actors and all of the genres. It's just amazing because nothing's rushed.
With this film, I strongly recommend to watch at least twice. Because the first time it's discovery, but the second time is almost as an orchestra director. He is so able to pace every element. And it's almost like a ballet because things are almost floating. So you see a level of the screen where things are like wavelengths, and you see the character bouncing and doing everything they have to do. It's an action, but it's also like a ballet.
Well, yeah, it's a very rhythmic film,
Yeah.
and I think we have to give credit to Jinmo Yang, the editor, as well, for the way that the film edit has these kind of duplications between shots. So we see repeated shots of one character, then a different character in a similar situation or a similar framing. It's obviously been thought out very, very carefully by the director, but the editing in combination with the music, it does create this kind of balladic.
Yeah, let's talk
feeling.
about the music. The use
music's
of
great, yeah.
of classical music. It reminded me of making of Itami Juzo Tampopo. So there's a director, Itami Juzo, is explaining the use of particular, I think, Bach, a piece of Bach, and how every action was motivated and paced upon the music. So he would recut, almost like reshoot with the music. So probably it's cutting, but it feels like it played the music on the spot and edited. It's so satisfying because all the action is with the resolution of the music. And one particular thing that I think that it shares with the Korean cinema is the not being afraid of the gross element. He goes for it.
The gross, you mean like the gore, the horror?
The grossness. So every earthy aspect, every bodily aspect. So
He doesn't shy away from
I
any.
know what
doesn't
you mean, and
shy
we're not going
away.
to spoil that.
No. I'll leave you, audience, too.
Will you leave me with that image? Once again, Maria's summed up exactly what I was trying to say in a much more eloquent way. But yeah, it is like the director and the editor together work as this kind of conductor of an orchestra. Because the way they piece it together, like any piece of classical music, it allows you to put your own interpretation on it as well. And I think that's something I love, is that film that lets you connect the dots yourself and lets you really think about it.
That's exactly right. Bong Joon-ho's approach to the audience is you're intelligent, you can follow what's going on. So all the exposition you need is there right at the beginning, and then we're off. We don't need to have things retold, re-explained. He treats his audience as people who are going to understand the story, and he doesn't talk down to them.
If you tell people you've seen Parasite, they instantly want to talk about it. And weirdly, I found there's a comparison there with the film we started with today, which is Inception. Not since Inception have so many people wanted to talk about, do you think it's this? Do you think it's that? What did you take away? Why do you think that happened? Do you think that happened? I'm trying
So
to
it's
do that
open
spoilers.
to interpretation, yeah.
And open, not just interpretation, intelligent conversation.
Right. Just going back to something that Maria said earlier on, it's a brilliantly inventive film. And when I was thinking about Tony Erdmann, a movie we mentioned already, I was thinking Erdmann might be the most inventive film in terms of just where the plot goes. It seems to be driven by the characters. It doesn't seem to have a plot forced onto the characters. The characters sort of generate the plot. It feels very, very natural and very organic. And here it's very much the same thing with Parasite. The characters seem to be driving things. Of course, Bong has a very clear voice, but never do you feel that he's sort of putting a superstructure over the plot and trying to force things in there that don't belong to who the characters are.
But I mean, I do have a question. It's the director explained that the reason he chose the role of a tutor as a way into the family, and I don't think that's too much of a spoiler, is that was one of the only roles he could think of where in Korean society you could have this interaction between the different layers. And now that rigid stratified society is something we're it's not alien to us here in Japan.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar.
No, but I'm really interested that it's perhaps in other countries where there is a little bit more looser, that this has still been so successful. Do you think that experience translates?
The characters have a clear want, and it's set up so perfectly in that very first scene where they're making pizza boxes, and that's not a huge spoiler, I don't think, that this family who are desperately poor and have to really beg the early 20s manager of the local pizza place to get paid because some of the pizza boxes weren't put together properly. I mean, that desperation, I think we all, as audience members, relate, we empathize with characters who are in that kind of situation. And that's why, right from the beginning, you feel for them, and whatever happens after that, you kind of want them to succeed.
And I think we've seen this before from him in his film The Host, where it's it's a bunch of the same actors, but it's that same situation where it's very poor family, kind of making ends meet, that desperation. And now in The Host, there's obviously a monster to fight, but in here the monster is the wealthy society that they're not allowed access to. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I loved Bong's quote about the film itself. He said it's a depiction of ordinary people who fall into an unavoidable commotion. This film is a comedy without clowns, a tragedy without villains, all leading to a violent tangle.
He's such a pithy writer. I mean, I love the way that he's endlessly quotable, isn't he?
He's been so good on all these interviews and awards, and he doesn't hold back, does he? He's great.
I think the premise of the film is autobiographical. Bong himself was a tutor. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really understandable in a modern society, the wealth gap. So the only way that you could access to that kind of world is work for them.
Of the performances, a standout is Kang Ho Song, who's a regular collaborator with Bong on many of his films. Kang Ho Song has one of the great turns in this film. I cannot spoil it, so I'm going to talk very euphemistically. For anyone who's seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. That toward the end of the film, for the most part without dialogue, Kang Ho Song's character, the father of the poor family, he slowly makes a turn, a change in the way he's approaching the rich family. And watching that change without any particular dialogue to say, this is where my character is going, we essentially just have medium shots and close-ups of his face, and we know what he's thinking. I mean, how good is that performance?
How much you can say with
just his eyes.
Just his eyes, yeah.
And he has a spectacular face.
And he also has a great face, yeah.
I think it's lovely to see him in his kind of dual role in this, where he's playing the father, where he's kind of a bit bumbling and a bit silly, but then you get to see him in that more professional role as the chauffeur. I thought it was lovely because we've only seen him in kind of the bumbling role in The Host and then in a more stoic performance in Snowpiercer. To see his range in this film is
really
spectacular.
Does have a lot of range, yeah.
He's really Korea De Niro.
Ian, of course, it was a lot of correspondence this week.
There always is. They love us, Marcus. I mean, they don't. Joining me in Correspondence Corner this week, we also have the lovely Maria to brighten up the place. And let's kick off with show favourite Ray Mera. He suggests a couple of films. So in the action genre, he loved Mad Max Fury Road, which we've talked about. He loved the John Wick series. We got a lot of love for the John Wick series. Everyone in the pub last night said it has to be John Wick as the defining films of the decade. I've seen all three. Parabellum's probably the best of three, but
I have only seen the first one.
But I did then push Ray on his favourite, and he chose The Raid.
The Raid, well, I think it's a Welsh director working out of Indonesia, right?
Yeah, I think it was the first time. I think he done a couple of music films, and then he moved into this. He said The Raid. Simple premise, brutal action, tension out the ass. Can we use ass? Are we allowed ass? Is that going to get us explicit?
No, it's okay.
Tension out the bum. And no damn shaky cams. Well, there might be a little during the shooting scenes, but the wide shots during the fights, and it's just, he's used another sweary. It's just very amazing. I'm having to self-edit here, right? Maria, please save me from these sweary correspondence.
I start with two of our freaking correspondents. Piero Savio, I Am Love by Luca Guadagnino. So technically it's the second movie of Guadagnino, of Call Me By Your Name fame. And I liked this film, and it was the reason for hoping great things from Luca Guadagnino, but then I was a little bit disappointed.
So sort of great expectations for Guadagnino's future career.
Tilda Swinton playing this Russian gold digger.
Yeah, but we love Tilda.
Yeah, we do.
We love Tilda. And some amazing Prada outfit. And Wayne Mitchell with Five-Headed Shark Attack.
Wayne, true to form.
Always provider of some gems.
And he's not the only one who suggested a shark film. Nick Harling, love you, Nick. Hope you made it home okay from that last night out. Was Sharknado 5, Global Swarming. And he says his reason is just for the catchy title.
Yeah, I love the subtitle. Global Swarming.
But then Nick did come back with them a little bit more. He said he also thought pretty much all the Marvel movies were dross, but Into the Spider-Verse was his pick. He said it was amazing, despite the premise, the characters were brilliant, and the animation original, and had such a cracking soundtrack. So
We all agree.
now the next one from me is a little bit long, so strap yourselves in. I'm sure a lot of this will get lost in the edit, but the lovely Gareth Bell did write as a 10-page essay on his favourite films of the decade.
Thank you, Gareth.
So I made him narrow it down to one, and we've still got about 2 pages here, so I'll just go for it. So his pick has
Is that how much he wrote?
Yeah, he wrote a lot more than that. That's me. That's already the edited version.
Okay. Good
So
luck
I'll
with-
do this
good
as
luck with that,
quickly
yeah.
as humanly possible. He says his pick has got to be Avengers Endgame. For him, part of any best movie consideration is, did this have to be a movie? He said too many great movies are simply well acted, and that's great and important, but you can find good acting on stage or TV. He needs a movie to make use of the big canvas it's got, and he wants it to be writ large and vivid colour, and for him the best movie needs to be a spectacle, and he said that has to be Avengers. To be that big and bold, and it's a movie that has to be experienced, the kind of cultural event that millions of people shared, and no one can tell him that it's just a splashy special effects movie. There was heart and emotion in that movie. Characters had arcs and feelings, and when Captain America said Avengers Assemble, he had chills. I have to agree, I kind of had that moment too. And he said he's even getting a tingle. I don't know where he's getting that tingle. He said writing this. Gareth, calm down. He also says to anyone that questions the quality of a movie, he simply says this: they had to build to it over 21 movies, and that's a lot. And there was so much expectation and hype, and what happened? It delivered. Think about that for a moment. Everything from Game of Thrones to Star Wars ended with a storm of fan backlash and anger, and the endings are pathetic. People have said, of course they failed, they can never please everyone. Well, Marvel did. In this day and age, to pull off something that huge and to have next to no complaints from the ever more angry and entitled audiences of the world, tens of millions of people saw it, and tens of millions of high hopes were met and satisfied. That should have been impossible, but for the best film of the decade, it wasn't. So I told you it was long, but it's very well written. So
Yeah, it's very well written.
A podcast on its own.
yes, we should get Gareth.
Yeah, as a guest.
Yeah.
Please, Maria.
I'll be
Again,
very synthetic. I'll throw like 3 names.
we're going to make you
Alan-
watch this, Maria.
Alan Roy with The Irishman, and my Aussie friend Paul Summers. Marcus, you're not the only Aussie friend I have. With Get Out and Parasite. The lovely Cristina Morini from Tokyo. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Elio Sara, the grand restaurateur.
This is Elio.
Elio, yes.
I don't know Elio.
Provider of last
Elio,
episode,
the
Panettone.
restaurant.
And
Elio.
restaurant.
Oh, we
and
love
I don't
Elio.
know how he got to see Preview, Pinocchio, from Matteo Garrone.
Is it the Garone one, or is he talking about the Disney one?
No.
Is
He's
it
talking about the decade. I don't think it's the last decade. No, he's talking about the Matteo Garrone version.
So he knows someone at the embassy.
Yeah. Or he knows.
It's not helping with the Italian stereotype here. He knows people.
Well, I mean, the film hasn't been released. Has it been released in Italy yet?
By the time this will be on air, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he's,
but by
he's
the
on
time
the inside.
He's connected.
Yeah.
But by the time that he wrote me, and he didn't want to disclose the details.
The
source.
means by which, yeah. And next up, I got Sam Berry of Jimmy Binks fame. He says basically he only likes 80s movies, and the best 80s movie of the 2010s was Sing Street. And followed up another lovely musician we haven't heard from before, Duncan Walsh of the Watanabe's fame. He says 45 years, deep, and set in North. They're 2 different films. I can't tell. 45 years, deep, he says it's set in Norfolk. I wonder if that's 2 different films. I really should check.
Is it because 45 Years is Deep and from Norfolk, or is it there's another film called Deep set in Norfolk?
Quite possibly.
Deep Norfolk.
Can you see how much research I do? And his more generic suggestions were The Reverend, Wolf of Wall Street, and he then says if Chernobyl was a movie, but that doesn't count because we're not a TV podcast. And next up was another Aussie, Joshua Kenwell. He had a whole bunch actually, but these are
Well,
really
that is a long list, yeah.
Yeah, these are really good shouts though. So, Hard to Be a God, brutal slog, but felt like a new experience. Tree of Life, which I really didn't get on with. Malik creates a sense of divinity. Melancholia, which again I didn't get on with. Overwhelming but a cathartic watch. Holy Motors, I know you watched a bit.
I have watched the first half of Holy Motors. I will be watching the second half. I love Carrick's, but so far I'm not entirely into it. I don't think I can really talk about a film I haven't finished.
This one I did love. Sorry to Bother You was a great film. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent movie.
And Midsommar, which you said he was thought/feeling provoking with a great ratcheting up of dread. I really like it. I really like Midsommar. And Mad Max, because Mad Max. And then, but he says his ultimate watch of the decade was Twin Peaks Season 3.
Absolutely. I loved it.
And I
loved it.
I can't read the last comment. You loved it from Marcus, loved it.
Loved it.
I think it goes beyond TV. It's installation. It's video installation.
And then next we had Matt Bigelow, who simply said, cats.
So, Matt, write back to us and tell us why you liked Cats so much and why it had to be all caps with an exclamation mark.
Well, he did write back to us, but it was in the second correspondence where Mickey Acorn, real name, said he loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's Tarantino's best of the decade. He really soaked it up. He loved the whole mixtape driving scenes, and I'm sure others felt like it dragged, but he just really enjoyed the journey.
I love the driving scenes.
Yeah, not so much for me. But then Matt Bigelow jumped back in with it's his favourite movie of all time, which I thought you just said was Cats. And he said he saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 3 times at the cinema.
Matt's had a change of heart very suddenly.
Maria, save me.
Okay.
Save me from visions of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but with cats
But
in
with
it.
cats. Stefania Vitti with The Great Beauty by Sorrentino. And from Nova Scotia, Andrew Hall with Moonlight, Mad Max Fury Road, Parasite, Roma, and Whiplash. He did a long list.
I do love Whiplash.
Cecilia Trinchi with Lion, and one of my best friend, Antonio Tulipano, with, again, Lion and A Star is Born. He's a mega fan of Gaga, obviously. And then we have 2 people with the same film, Andrea Signori and Anna Pellegrini with Spotlight, and Michael Kelly with Moonlight. It was a tough choice. He said that there were a lot of movies that were important to him, but ultimately he chose this title. And
just on Moonlight, I mean, we have talked about this a little bit on the show. For the first 2/3, I think it's absolutely brilliant. It just doesn't quite work for me in the final
act. The third act is not satisfactory for me. It's a lot of tension that are unresolved.
And we had a really interesting suggestion from Mike de Jong. He says Pork Pie. It's a brilliant indie film we saw in New Zealand, poignant and thought-provoking. Pork Pie, just to give a little bit of the setup, because I don't know this film at all, but Pork Pie tracks the escapades of a trio of accidental outlaws as they travel the length of New Zealand in a yellow Mini, protesting conformity, chasing lost love, with a posse of cops and a media frenzy hot in their pursuits. Does this ring any bells with you, Mike?
Doesn't at all.
It's actually a remake of this in the 1981 film Goodbye Pork Pie, which some claim launched this kind of new wave of New Zealand cinema. But I did watch the trailer. It looks really interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to have to check that one out.
Yeah, I'll link to the trailer in the show notes. And then we have Jeremy, lovely drunky Jeremy. Jeremy, I can't pronounce your surname, Jeremy. I have no idea how to do it. He said Birdman, the Master.
It's Lachlan.
I think it's
Lachlan.
It's Irish.
Lachlan.
I think it's Lachlan.
Lachlan?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's why I wasn't going to try it.
And for the last part of my list, Giancarlo Caforio with Shoplifters. We love the movie.
Don't make me cry again.
Yeah. And Federico Cambiaghi, who is always trying to expand our knowledge of Mariah Carey-related film, with Precious by Lee Daniels, with Mariah Carey playing the part of a waitress.
Oh, I'd forgotten about Precious. Precious is amazing. It's brutal. Have you seen it?
I think he got a couple of Oscars.
Yeah, it's the female lead. I think it was her first film. She is jaw-dropping in it. It's amazing. It's brutal. It truly is.
This is like early in the decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do recall it. Yeah, I didn't see it. I remember it winning a lot of awards.
I've seen it a couple of times. Yeah, it's really good.
Good call.
But then provided a more traditional choice with La La Land. And Luca Trombetta with Whiplash, which seemed to be
popular choice, yeah.
Popular choice. And we'll end up with Jarno Bignone, who provided us with a list. But I just chose things that are not mentioned, like Mommy by Xavier Dolan, and Patterson, Jim Jarmusch, and Amour by Haneke. And that's all for me.
Okay, I've just got a couple more. And we got... So Becca Ken got in touch. It's lovely to hear from you, Becca. She suggests An Act of Killing. It ticked every box for a great documentary, illuminating an important part of history, forensically pulling apart complex contributors, use the action of witnessing to devastating end both in the front and behind the camera. looked absolutely gorgeous. Packed an emotional gut punch, stretching the genre conventions as far as it veered into art and delivering an astonishing piece of unconventional journalism. That's a hell of a review.
Yeah, that's another great, well-written review.
Becca herself kind of works in documentary making and stuff like that. She's a very interesting person. Last two, I'm almost there. Then we got Sam Lopario suggested Uncut Gems, which is that this decade? Is that in the next decade?
It's this year.
It's this year.
No,
So
last year, 2019.
And last but not least, we have the lovely Steve Roberts, who I'm not talking to. You're supposed to come for a beer yesterday and you didn't. He said there were so many great sci-fi movies in his opinion, but then he loves his sci-fi, he really does. He said Ender's Game, Elysium, Edge of Tomorrow, Oblivion, Star Trek, Into the Darkness. But his favourite film, and it seems quite fitting for the end of last decade, was World's End.
And that marks the end of the correspondence.
See, look how professional I am.
Well, thank you very much, one and all, for your contributions to that. That was fantastic. There's some great reviews there.
Yeah, some of them are much better at talking about films than we are.
You've been listening to The Last Picture House. Be sure to let us know what you think of the show on Twitter, where we're at Last Pick House. Follow us on Facebook or on Instagram, where we're Last Picture House, one word. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for listening.
Can we end it there?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah.
Are we done?
Yeah,
Done,
that's
done.